Crested geckos are one of the most popular reptiles in the hobby, but why would you get one when you can get one of these animals instead? Crested geckos are amazing, so don't take this as crested geckos suck, although I did make a video right here you can watch about the reasons you might be able to think that. Crested geckos are amazing. I've had crested geckos for over 10 years. It was one of the first reptiles I started to get into when I got into the hobby, and realistically, it's an 8 to 10 inch animal if you include the tail, although they do fall off and they do not grow back, that eats things like, well, Repashy or Pangea, whatever powder diet you want to give it, and then a little bit of insects. So it's really simple to take care of these awesome arboreal lizards that, if you didn't know, were thought to be extinct until 1994. They're from a place in the world called New Caledonia, and New Caledonia is kind of in the middle of the ocean, kind of by Australia, I guess. And they were researching, these researchers, in the islands of New Caledonia, and one of these fell through a research tent onto a researcher, and he looks at it and thinks, this is supposed to be extinct. Anyway, that's a little bit of backstory about the crested gecko, and there's a bunch of different morphs. This is a tiger morph, which just randomly popped out. I produced this animal, didn't even know I had any animals that could produce this. Amazing, beautiful, but there are 3 animals I think are much better options. So let's go through those today. Also, this guy needs a name, so in the comment section below, what should his name be? So let's start off with our third option. It's kind of obvious. This is a Chihuahua gecko. And make no mistake, these are very similar to crested geckos. I'm literally holding my hand out like this because I know he's going to jump. And this isn't going to be a video where I talk about a gargoyle gecko and then a Leachianus. This is the only one that's from New Caledonia that's super similar. I mean, look at this thing. This is a beautiful, beautiful gecko, and they come from the same place and they have the same diet, but they're a little bit bigger. Chihuahua geckos are going to be 10 to 12 inches instead of 8 to 10 inches. So they're bigger and they're also stockier. If you get one of these in your hand, it feels bigger than a crested gecko. Now, another thing you should know is these animals are very nice and they're a little bit more active is the word I was looking for, than a crested gecko. If you want an animal that's just gonna chill and barely move, crested geckos are kind of like the arboreal gecko version of a bearded dragon. I mean, if you watch the channel, you see Diamond chill on my shoulder and just barely ever moves. Crested geckos are kind of like that, where Chihuahua geckos are gonna move around a little bit more, and they sometimes will actually take a little bit of work to become handleable, where crested geckos out of the box almost all the time are basically perfect animals for handling. So if you're getting your kid a gecko, you might want to think about a crested gecko. But if you're getting, say, an older kid, a teenager, or yourself a gecko that's going to be a little bit more fun than a crested gecko, then you might want to think about a Chihuahua gecko. Not only are they bigger and a little bit more active, but also you see this tail right here. This tail will actually grow back for most, right? So there's a few different types of Chihuahua geckos. This is a mainland Chihuahua gecko, so if the tail falls off, he'll just grow back. Some are Pine Island Chihuahua geckos, which in my opinion are a little bit prettier and they're definitely more expensive. And sometimes they're more apt not to grow their tail back unless it's broken off right at the base. With that said, do you really have to worry about it? Not really. Crested geckos look cute without a tail in the first place, and these guys are very inapt to drop their tail. In fact, I would say that crested geckos are much more likely to drop their tail than a Chihuahua, which is just another reason why you'd probably want a Chihuahua instead of a crested. Not only that, but they're gonna eat the same diet, even though it's a bigger animal. Although I recommend a little bit higher protein. So for example, if you have a Chihuahua gecko and you wanna feed the animal, say, every 2 days, which is what I recommend, you mix up some Pangea, Repashy, whatever it is that you're gonna have, into a cup with water, and then you put it in the enclosure, and then it just disappears like a freaking magic trick because these things eat like crazy. And then give them crickets once a week or twice a week, dubia roaches, worms, maybe, some of them will eat them, mine usually don't. And that's it. The only thing that I could say is a little bit not as cool about these guys in terms of crested geckos is the price tag. These animals are going to be about 250 to 350 bucks if you buy a mainland like this guy here, who also needs a name, by the way. If you want to name him, he is for sale, but we could name him before he sells. Whereas Pine Islands are gonna sell for up to 700 bucks, maybe even more. With a really thick white collar, oftentimes they go for over 1,000 bucks. So crested geckos you can get for under 50 bucks. It was last week's video and they made the list. Chihuahuas, you're definitely not gonna find for under 50 bucks, but I think it's worth it. And because you can still cohab them while doing your research, I understand that some people don't, and you don't have to by any means. You don't have to cohab your Chihuahua gecko, which means keep more than one together. But if you wanted to keep females together, most of the time it it works. I mean, do your research on how to set that up properly. And then even sometimes people in really big enclosures will put males and females together full time. Again, do your research. Don't just start throwing geckos all in one enclosure. So Chahuas on my list are number 3. And I think that the next animal, which is not a gecko, is probably even better and probably more popular. Another great option is number 2, and this is an emerald tree skink. And drawing a direct comparison between a crested gecko and an emerald tree skink, I realize might be a little bit far-fetched, but here's why I think that's the case. Because if you're looking for a crested gecko, chances are you aren't a gecko enthusiast. You're probably looking for an entry-level type gecko or type arboreal lizard that exhibits the characteristics that you're looking for. Relatively easy diet, doesn't like temperatures too hot or too cold or too humid that's hard to keep, like things like that, right? So I think that an emerald tree skink is a perfect option for you. Now, the big difference obviously is it is a skink species, not a crested gecko or a gecko at all. It's obviously not a crested gecko. So these animals don't come from the same part of the world. They would never interact together. You wouldn't find them in the same place. However, emerald tree skinks are becoming wildly popular, and because of that, that means that the captive bred population or stock is growing. Just quickly, if you're new to this, captive bred means they're born in captivity. This is almost always better. They don't come with parasites, dehydrated, sick, whatever. And then wild caught is animals that are wild caught and sometimes farmed. Anyway, the point is, emerald tree skinks you can get from a breeder now that popped out of an egg in captivity that don't have parasites and dehydration and all the rest of it. And that's good. That's a very good thing. And the price is going down too. Now, emerald tree skinks are around the same size, 8.5, 10.5 inches, something like that. And of course, their tails aren't going to just fall off and never grow back, which is great. So they have that with the crested geckos. I know a lot of people hate the fact that crested geckos drop their tails and then don't grow them back. You don't have to worry about that with an emerald tree skink. But what you do have to worry about is live insects more often, because these animals aren't going to eat a powdered diet, or at least shouldn't have their staple be a powdered diet. Their staple should be, well, live insects. And their personality is different too. They're personable. These animals are known for being amazing animals for people who aren't really used to animals that are a little bit more difficult to take care of or difficult to handle. And if you want an animal you're going to handle, which I mean a lot of us do, that's how I pick a lot of animals that I have, you're going to want something that's not too quick or too flighty and definitely not too bitey. And these animals, don't get me wrong, are quicker and they're going to jump a little bit in different ways than a crested gecko or a Chahoua gecko. So some might think that a more agile, quick, jumpy lizard isn't the best. But what happens is, in my experience, when I go over to Daffy's Reptiles house, for example, and I see these emerald tree skinks, he opens the enclosure and they jump on him as if like they haven't seen him all day and it's like a puppy, okay? So they're very affectionate animals, or they seem to be, but they at least seem to like their owners. Even if they think of you as the guy who is warm or the tree that is warm who brings them food, who cares? At the end of the day, it feels like there's some sort of connection between them that, in my experience and opinion, you don't really get with most crested geckos. Not to say crested geckos aren't affectionate and they're aloof, but they're definitely not, in my opinion, like an emerald tree skink. And what I like about emerald tree skinks too is the fact that they're good looking, they're shiny, they have eyelids that work, which is another thing. If you didn't know, most gecko species, including both the ones we spoke about, crested geckos and Chahoua geckos, don't have movable eyelids. So some people might think that is a little alien. It's off-putting. I hear that a lot of the time, which I never would have thought of until I started reading comments on YouTube. So they lick their own eyes and the whole thing. Skinks don't have this adaptation. So they have an extra adaptation, I guess, in that their eyelids are usable, like a leopard gecko, for example. Either way, it makes them a little bit less alien. It's a little bit cuter in a lot of people's eyes. And the fact that they are an arboreal animal and they eat insects, just they're so similar to a crested gecko, but they are just different enough to make them different. Super friendly, their skin feels awesome, super shiny. I love emerald tree skinks, but I think all of them pale in comparison to number 1. So number 1, better than a crested gecko, in my opinion, mountain horn dragons. I'll keep this one quicker because we just spoke about them a few weeks ago, and I speak about them a lot. I love mountain horn dragons. I think that these are going to be on the rise. I think that there are so many different options, and that's why it's difficult to pin down, well, a direct comparison between crested geckos and these guys. So these are from Southeast Asia, all of them, but there's big ones and little ones. So if you want something that gets up to 15 inches, like a bigger mountain horn dragon, you can get one. If you want something that's similar size to a crested gecko, you can get one. If you want something something that's smaller than a crested gecko like this guy right here, which is Acanthosaura lepidogaster, or pygmy or dwarf mountain horn dragons, you can get those. This is about as big as they get, maybe a little bit bigger, but they're not going to get much bigger than this. And they feel nothing like a crested gecko. Another complaint I get with crested geckos a lot, weird, like not slimy, but their fingers have these suction cups on them, right? So for example, the skinks we talked about can't climb walls. The crested geckos and Chahoua geckos can climb walls or glass or objects. So these guys and the skinks will use claws instead of these sticky toe pad type things. And the sticky toe pad type things, or toesies, I think is the medical term, people don't like them a lot of the time because they feel weird, and they do feel weird. The way that they grip your skin, uncomfortable for some people. I think it's cute and I love it, but some people don't. And you don't have to worry about that with mountain horn dragons. They have claws, but the claws aren't going to hurt you. Maybe it's like a little, have you ever held a hamster? It's kind of like that. A hamster or a pet mouse, that's what it feels like. So you can feel the claws, but they don't break skin. They're not gonna stick in your skin. They're not gonna make you bleed. It's not, say, I don't know, the monkey tail skink, where every time I take these guys, I like, look at the size of them, right? They cut up my hands. These guys, you don't have to worry about that. And if you're thinking to yourself, I like the skinks because they eat insects, and it's fun to watch animals chase insects. These guys do the same. They don't eat a powder diet, they eat live insects. I feed them all the time black soldier fly larvae, they love those. I love to feed them roaches and then crickets. You drop in some crickets, and then you walk away, or you watch them chase them, and that's it. Another thing is, if you want multiple animals in one enclosure, as long as it's a big enough enclosure and you're doing your research, it's kind of a hot button topic, then you can use mountain horn dragons in an enclosure like that. It's an arboreal lizard that's gonna be basically never on the ground unless they're laying eggs or chasing insects. It's always gonna be up in the trees, but an added element is they love moving water. So if you wanted a paludarium, you could technically do that with a crested gecko. They're not really the best swimmers. None of them are that I've talked about so far. These guys are great swimmers, and they, as long as the water is moving, which is a weird thing about them, they don't like still water, they can't see it, it's invisible to them, they could drown. But have a bubbler or a filter or whatever, waterfall, and these guys will be in the water, they'll be up top, and then they'll basically never be anywhere that's land, just simply because they're prey items. And the best way for them to stay alive in the wild is to be either in the water, they're usually over branches, over streams in the wild. I've seen them in Southeast Asia and Thailand, and that's where they are, hunting for insects like ants. And then if they see a predator, they'll bolt up a tree or go into the water. So it's really fun to watch their reaction, but something just like the skinks is they never have that reaction. I thought when I first was introduced to this species of animal, a flighty animal, they're gonna be boring. Have you seen this animal move once? Not one time. These animals do not want to get away from you. In fact, they jump on you when you open the enclosure, and that's something I love about them too. Also, they don't drop their tails, so this tail, I mean, I don't recommend tugging on their tails, but they're not gonna drop them if you do. So either way, I think that mountain horn dragons are just cooler looking. They're a little bit more exotic. Your friends probably don't have them, which is another thing with crested geckos is everybody has them. I mean, if you go into a PetSmart or Petco, you see them, and any animal in one of those stores is pretty popular. And kind of, you know, if you're a hipster type person, I want something cool before someone else has it, then get yourself a mountain horn dragon. They're definitely not as popular now as they will be next year or the year before. They're gonna blow up, so get them while you still can before everybody has them and the price starts to go crazy. Next year and the year after, not the year before. You guys know what I'm talking about. Either way, let me know in the comment section below what you think is a better option than a crested gecko, or is a crested gecko really king of the castle? As always, please hit the like and subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. It really helps the channel out. And thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys get videos early, discounts on merch, one-on-ones. I love doing the one-on-ones. I send you a Zoom link. We talk about whatever you want to talk about. Your geckos, your reptiles, my reptiles, how to make a YouTube channel, Instagram, whatever it is. All that for as little as $1 a month. And that's it. Because I do videos twice a week, that means I'll see you in the next one.